Hello, and thank you for joining this month's Safety Culture World webinar titled After the START Workshop, Maximizing Your Safety Culture Improvement Action Plan. I'm Abby Fansler with Caterpillar Safety Services, and I will facilitate today's event. Before I introduce our presenter, I have a couple of announcements. First, all of the participant phone lines are muted. We do this in order to ensure a smooth listening experience for everyone. But I do encourage you to submit questions and comments about the material, and you may do so by using the chat or the Q&A sections of WebEx and sending those to me. And we will use the final 10 to 15 minutes today for Q&A. Also, this event is being recorded. The recording and a PDF version of Jason's slide deck will be posted to safety.cat.com after the event. You will receive an email notification once those materials have been uploaded. And also, we will share a coupon code for the START program at the end of today's event as a thank you for participating. With that code, you may receive 25% off a new order of START. Now, I will introduce our presenter, Jason Michael. Jason is a regional EHS manager for Caterpillar, responsible for facilities in the North American West region. He has 19 years of experience in environmental health and safety, and has been engaged in Caterpillar's journey to safety excellence for 9 years. Jason facilitates the START program and the Zero Incident Performance process for safety culture improvement inside Caterpillar facilities across the country. And with that, Jason, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks, Abby. Appreciate the introduction. So today we're going to talk about START. All right. There we go. So our goal, provide some tips and techniques for implementing the START action plans and sustaining those results after the process has been implemented. So quick agenda. First, we're going to start out by talking about what is START, so we all have a baseline of what we're talking about. How START can improve the culture in your facilities. Some common pitfalls that facilities have run into in the past when implementing START. An effective implementation. Use of the action plans that is part of the START program, and then best practices and success stories that we've seen as facilities have implemented the START process. So let's first talk about what is START. START is a 3-module training course. It basically is run over either a day or a day and a half worth of material. It includes a facilitator guide, participant workbooks, DVD, PowerPoint, quizzes, and like I said, the action plan, which is really an important part of the START material. It's all centered around an engaging storyline of a 5-part video series, which takes a fictitious company through the process of realizing their culture, where they at, and how they go about trying to improve it. So what START does is explains why safety accountability works, how a positive culture impacts the bottom line, and why supervisors managers can do to inspire strong performance within their organization. The START material can be delivered in a do-it-yourself model, START workshops delivered by CAT Safety Services, or a START Train the Trainer program also delivered by CAT Safety Services, which then allows you to fully develop or fully roll out the program within your organization. So the course map is for START is basically centered around 3 separate modules. The first one is looking at why to improve. So everyone's got to have a baseline of why do we want to improve our safety culture, both the moral, ethical, the financial, and the legal reasons. Module 2 focuses mainly on what makes an effective safety culture. And we're going to talk a little bit more about setting clear expectations and notice and investigate here in a minute. And then Module 3 is basically the how. How do we engage employees? And we're going to talk a little bit about the accountability model built into the program. So let's first talk about focusing on expectations and activities. How many companies out there probably have results for their supervisors and employees based around the end result, right? No injuries, no recordables, hopefully definitely no fatalities. The results that everyone wants, the results that management wants, but how many set those activities also as the goals for supervisors and employees? And how much real control do supervisors have employees as an organization have over the overall, if someone gets injured or not injured? Better would be to set activities around things that supervisors control. How well they do near-miss investigations, how well they do inspections, how well they involve their employees in the inspections, how well employees get involved in those inspections. Individual things that those employees can directly control. And when you do that, employees and supervisors often get very engaged in the safety, accountability, and safety activities compared to setting expectations around no injuries, and they get very disengaged, especially with a supervisor who is in a department and they have an injury maybe completely out of their control, could even have been in the parking lot of the facility, and then that supervisor is held accountable because of that injury that took place. So I mentioned a little bit about accountability. Accountability in this program is built into a four-step process. We look at defining, training, measure, and then finally, the most important, recognize. So when we look at the define phase of accountability, so many companies build and define activities with a top-down approach. Management decides what defined activities will be at each level and cascades them throughout the organization. The problem with this is employees, even supervisors, all involved, so they don't agree or comment on the activities. If you want to build a positive safety culture, what you need to do is management needs to let go and let employees help and get involved in setting those defined activities that they should be held accountable for. That way, they're engaged, they're part of the process, and they're more focused on what they need to do. The next thing is obviously you've got to train. So once employees understand what is expected of them, you need to train them and equip them with the ability to perform those activities. And for years, we have focused safety training on hourly workforce, when many times it's the supervisors and managers that need the training in order to effectively perform their own safety activity and support the activities of their direct reports. So this is more than just the compliance training or the training. It's once you define, back to the safety river, what we define activities that we're going to hold employees and supervisors accountable to, we have to train them on to properly execute those activities. Third is the measure. A well-trained, well-equipped employee should be a safe worker, but we should never assume that simply because we set clear expectations and train someone that the required actions will be taken. Instead, we need to measure and ensure the work is being done and being done in a quality manner. And we should focus the measure on catching employees doing things right and not always on catching them doing things wrong, which is another big piece of the S.T.A.R.T program. And we'll talk more about that in detail in a little bit. With employees and catching them doing things right, we need to recognize their performance. Again, like I said, the problem with most managers is that we've been trained to solve problems. So we're constantly on the lookout for things that are wrong or out of compliance. Most companies have something in place for correcting unsafe actions or related behaviors, but very few have a mechanism to identify and correct the things right, or recognize things that are right with employees that are doing. A change in culture from an organization will take shape drastically when you start recognizing employees for what they're doing right compared to catching what they're doing wrong. So let's look a little bit at notice and investigate, and recognizing and catching employees doing things right. So what % of the time do you think employees out there are working safely compared to working unsafely? A vast majority of the time, workers are performing their jobs safely. Yet most of our supervisor activities are designed to catch employees doing something wrong, or correct things that are wrong, or train them when things are wrong. We're all focused on what employees are doing unsafe, when in essence, the majority of the time, employees are doing everything perfectly right. So we need to focus our activities on rewarding and recognizing employees when they're doing things correctly. As you can see, if you look at the balance, we recommend that a 7-to-1 ratio. So for every one time that you catch someone doing something wrong and correct them, you should be recognizing employees for things that they are doing safe and reward and recognize that performance. So how can S.T.A.R.T improve the safety culture within an organization? First of all, there is no magic solution. There is not one thing catches all, and if you do this one program just this exact way, it'll correct all problems within your organization. And you cannot take what one facility does across the street and replicate it exactly into your organization and get the exact same success. You have to identify where your culture's at, what the personalities are within your organization, and identify and create an action plan that will help mitigate and improve that safety culture. Also, we have to get away from, it's not my issue, talk to the safety person. How many times in an organization do employees or supervisors say, I don't know what happened with that, that's the safety guy's responsibility. What I would challenge facilities is how many times when a quality issue or a production issue comes up, does the supervisor say, talk to the quality department or talk to someone in the production area? It's the supervisor's responsibility to manage safety, quality, and production across the board. And it's the safety department's responsibility to help support that supervisor in what he needs to effectively manage safety within his group. Communication and motivation. When do you hear about safety? Is it only when bad things happen? What is the perception of safety by the hourly workforce or the production floor when you only hear about safety when bad things happen? What kind of top-level management support is seen, is perceived by the workforce when only they see the top management when bad things happen? It gives a very negative perception of safety, and that management really doesn't care, and they only care about when someone gets hurt. So you really need to overcome that and look at how you communicating and how top management is communicating about safety. Ineffective programs lacking top-down support for safety, kind of related to the communication. You've got to get top-level management, and we'll talk about 6 criteria here in a little bit, visibly committed to safety, and not just when something bad happens or they have bad numbers for a month or bad numbers for a quarter. All of a sudden there's all kinds of communication. It needs to be throughout the entire process. Or lacking supervisor accountability. We talked about accountability a little bit earlier. Again, it can't be accountability for safety numbers. It needs to be accountability for activities that those supervisors have direct control over and can accept and tackle. And you need to get away from the tradition of it's always done this way. And we hear that many times within organizations. Folks on the floor, you don't understand. This is the way we've always done it. I've never gotten hurt. You've never gotten hurt yet. That doesn't mean the risk isn't there and the opportunity isn't there to get hurt. So you have to get away from the I've always done it this way mentality. So let's talk a little bit about why incidents happen. Do incidents occur because of conditions or behaviors? Statistics tell us that 90% of all incidents happen because of risky behaviors, either behaviors of the direct employee that got injured or risky behaviors of some other employee that left the machine guard off the machine or left the puddle of oil on the floor or something else. It's typically not a machine that leaves the machine guard off itself. Usually someone does a risky behavior that leaves the machine guard off. So why do employees take these risky behaviors? It's related to the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas that you have within the facility. So the attitude or belief or idea that I had to take that shortcut. I didn't have time to clean up that spill, or I had to leave that machine guard off. Those are the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas of the facility or the organization or the culture that lead to the at-risk behaviors. And those attitude, beliefs, and ideas come from the norms and the culture within the organization. And that's what the S.T.A.R.T program is all about, tackle the culture piece of the organization So when employees think, I don't have time, I've got to rush, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, that's not the mentality or the culture of the organization. So it changes the attitudes, beliefs, and ideas. In essence, fewer at-risk behaviors are conducted, leading to fewer injuries. So let's take a look at the 6 criteria I mentioned earlier. These 6 criteria were developed by Dr. Peterson, who spent over 50 years researching and developing safety performance and looking at companies that have excellent safety performance. And what he found over those years is that organizations that have these 6 elements embedded within their culture have a very positive safety culture and also very good safety performance. So first thing I mentioned earlier was top-line management is visibly committed. And that is not when just there's an injury or safety numbers look bad. That's day in, day out on the floor, talking to employees, showing visible commitment for safety all the time, just like they show visible commitment for production and quality. Middle management actively involved. That would look like your superintendent level out on the shop floor, same thing, talking to employees, maybe attending, if you do startup meetings, supervisors do startup meetings, they attend those startup meetings on a regular basis and ask how things are going, coach supervisors after the startup meeting of how they could have done better, how could they engage their workforce better in the safety discussion for that day. But really active involvement in the program and the safety culture, and not just when an injury happens or injury numbers look bad. Frontline supervision, foremen or leads are performance focused. We talked about this a little bit in the accountability. They shouldn't be performance focused to safety numbers. They should be performance focused to activities that they can control, and not a check in the box performance activity is also. So we mentioned startup meetings, not did you do your startup meeting, yes or no, a conversation with their direct report on how well did they do their startup meetings, who did they engage with during the startup meetings during this last week, what action plans did they get from employees, how do they plan on executing on those action plans, showing definite performance-focused activities that they're doing to proactively engage employees and change the culture within the organization. And you've got to have employees that are actively participating. When we mention setting activities or defining activities that people are going to be accountable for, you can't be a top-down approach. You've got to get employees involved, get their opinions. Folks on the floor have way more ideas and opinions than most management folks sitting in the office can come up with. Get them involved, get their ideas, make them part of the solution, make them part of what should we hold people accountable for, what looks good. System obviously has to be flexible to accommodate the culture. You can't go too fast, you can't go too slow. You got to identify where you're at and take things appropriate. And if you do all those things, ultimately you're going to have a safety system that is positively perceived by the workforce. And also to get those things, you've got to have a positive perception by the group. So that kind of covers what S.T.A.R.T is and what S.T.A.R.T is all about. Now we'll get into the bulk of the presentation around effective implementation of the S.T.A.R.T material. So first you have to determine who is capable of facilitating the training. And I want to emphasize the word facilitating because this training is not a typical stand up in front of the classroom and a lecturer reads the slides to the participants and you go through it and then check the box and we're done. This is a true facilitation of the material. Ongoing discussion, there's role playing, there's breakout sessions, there's lots of discussion, and really the facilitator's job of this training is to really engage the workforce. It should not be a one-way conversation. It should be a two-way ongoing dialogue through the 8 to 12 hours of training material and really get people thinking about safety in a different way. Have the executive team go through the training first. So if your organization has decided, S.T.A.R.T is something for us and we want to explore this, have your executive team go through the training, the full 8 hours, just like they would roll it out everywhere else, and develop an implementation strategy. How are we going to roll this out to the rest of the organization? What's the timeline? What's the communication? What does this look like? How do we want it to be done? Third thing is execute an executive sponsor at each START class. So when you kick off the training, each training session, ideally, have someone from the executive team talk about why this is important to the organization, why it's important to them. Obviously, supervisors, if they know it's important to their boss, it's going to become important to them. And we'll talk about, after the training, how you can continue to sustain that. Or even better yet, have your superintendent sit through for a second time the entire class that all his supervisors sit through, and throughout the training, that superintendent can chime in and give examples of here's what he expects, here's how he thinks things are going to go moving forward. And I mentioned it before, but I put it on here again. Create a strategy for improvement. You've got to have a strategy. Establish accountabilities within existing safety activities. How are we going to hold people accountable after they go through the START training, and what's that going to look like? How are we going to improve our training or onboarding process for new supervisors? So this isn't a one-time and done. Every time you get a new supervisor, superintendent, even a new plant manager, how are we going to onboard them and get them up to speed on this process so it doesn't die? And how are we going to increase the number of meaningful safety conversations that supervisors have with employees? Again, we're talking about the 7-to-1 positive recognition conversations. How are we going to do that? What does that look like? So if we talked about earlier about during the training, you develop an action plan. This action plan is very crucial to taking away from the 8 to 12-hour training and doing something with it. So in classes I've done in the past, some supervisors have done them, some haven't. It really needs to be mandatory that you walk away as a supervisor, whoever takes a class, with a very clear, here's my action plan, here's what I learned during the course, here's what I'm going to do different. And a good way to have that done is have a review meeting set up with that direct report following the training. So if I'm taking the training this week, you know what, I know I'm taking the training this week, and I already know next week I'm going to have to sit down with my boss and review my action plan, and maybe those action plans will become part of my performance review process for this year or going forward into next year. And that gets us to the next bullet. Incorporate these action plans so it's not just a one-time and done. Make sure they're a living document, they're part of the performance review process, and you can very easily, instead of a check the box, how you do it on this or that, have conversations. Ask, how have you changed the way you delivered recognition? And how are you holding yourself and others accountable for safety? The manager can ask the supervisor, explain to me how you're doing things differently. Explain to me how you've improved in this area. Explain to me how you've executing your action plan and making a difference. Doing these things will help to make it not just another safety training course. And that's obviously a huge failure if this turns out to be just another safety training course and employees walk away with their action plan, put it on the corner of their desk. Next thing, it gets buried under numerous other things and then eventually filed somewhere that you know where it's at. Then it turns into just another one of those safety courses we did 6 months ago that turn into anything. So some best practices. We talked about making sure everyone coming into the organization gets the training and is up to speed when they come in or is assigned to a new role. Easy way to do this is integrate it to START into a mandatory leadership development fundamental course. I'm sure through HR organizations there's some mandatory courses that every supervisor has to go through, every manager has to go through. Incorporate the START training as part of that so it doesn't slowly over time as changes happen fall off the table. And yeah, half of our people are trained, but half of them aren't. That way they get it right off the bat. Conduct refresher training on START concepts. So 6 months after you've developed the training, hopefully you're having the ongoing conversations with your bosses, but have a toolbox talk or a lunch and learn, what we call them, or some other things where supervisors get together and maybe it's facilitated, maybe it's just the supervisors, and they share best practices. They talk about, hey, here's how I've helped, be able to engage my folks more. Here's some ways I've done recognition, because we know recognition is hard. It's not common nature for us to provide recognition. It's very easy for us to say, do this, do that, don't do this. But we've got to share ideas and share best practices on how we can recognize and incorporate the material into our everyday life. Integrate START conversations into regular staff meetings. So I assume all managers throughout most organizations are doing regular staff meetings. Ask for safety share moments. It can either be mandatory or optional, but a good way to do it is optional. Just as you're around the table before you get your meeting started, say, hey, who's got some START moments to share? And maybe certain supervisors chime up, or hey, last week I did this, I've done this, I had really good engagement on this or that. And those supervisors that aren't quite getting it are going to hear the others around the table talking about what they're doing and how they're engaging their folks, and that's going to force them, if they want to come to the meeting and be seen in a good light with their manager, incorporate some of the things that they're hearing and start doing them in their department. And they, in the weeks following, they can bring to the table, here's what I've done, and that way you're not calling out an individual person or putting anyone on the spot. Now, obviously, if you ask for volunteers, you don't get a whole lot. The other approach you could take is obviously putting people on the spot and directly asking someone, what have you directly done related to your action plan or related to the START training we did for START moments last week? Give me one example. Give me two examples. Things like that. You also can conduct pre or post interviews with employees to validate the changes that you've done with the supervisors. So again, we're trying to positively perceive or get the employees to positively perceive the safety culture within the organization. Ask them 2 months out, 6 months out, explain to them what the START training was, and ask them, have you seen a meaningful change in the way your supervisors interact with you, discuss with you, do startup meetings, have safety conversations, do safety contacts? Have you seen a positive change in the way that's happened? And if the answer is yes, take that information, positively recognize the supervisor for what he's doing that is positive. If the answer is no, then you need to go back to your action plan, see where we're missing it, why we're not getting it, why we're not having the supervisors connecting with the employees, and make adjustments as needed. Pitfalls to be wary of. Avoid the flavor of the month. I mentioned it already, but you really need to avoid this being a flavor of the month. And you can very easily do that by the training program we talked about, the having it integrated into staff meetings, or all the. You really want to have a strategic plan that how are we going to execute this, and so it doesn't become the flavor of the month. Because you get only so many opportunities to try to go after and improve the culture within an organization. And if you keep coming up with flavor of the month, flavor of the month, flavor of the month, time after time, eventually employees are going to lose interest, and they're going to lose faith and credibility with the management team and say, yeah, here we go again, another thing that isn't going to work, give it a few months and it'll fizzle out. If you go forward with START, you really got to make sure that doesn't happen. Dragging the training out over an extended period of time. Again, maybe it's okay to do your executive level at one time and have a little bit of a gap as they develop a strategic plan and how are we going to roll this out and what's this going to look like. But once you truly start rolling it out at the supervisor level, it should be a very compressed time frame and get everyone through the training quickly, effectively. As you don't want to rush the training, but you want to get them through and don't drag it out over many months. Again, just another opportunity for supervisors and or employees to tag this as flavor of the month. And as we know, once something gets tagged as flavor of the month, it's very hard to overcome that title. So poor facilitation. I mentioned earlier about the facilitator. It's facilitation training, not just training. And the content cannot overcome poor training or a poor trainer. Again, this cannot be just someone you pull off the floor and hey, this person does good training. This isn't real. This is training, but it's really a facilitator that can truly engage the audience and engage the participants into discussion and get them to think outside the box, get them to think realistically about the way they're performing safety, the way they're managing safety, the way they recognize employees. A lot of the concepts we talked about earlier, if they all come in closed-minded, it's that facilitator's job to get them to think things differently, talk amongst each other, share ideas, share best practices, share how, as an organization, realistically, here's where we are, be honest with ourselves, and move forward with developing a good plan to improve the safety culture. No executive support or visible commitment. Again, if you don't have the executive level on board, ready to show visible commitment, they can't participate in the training, or they can't sit through the entire day, but they'll give you partial days. I don't think that would happen if you had a major quality issue or a production issue. My guess is they would probably clear their calendar and be there and show the support they need no matter what. So you really need to make sure your executive management is on board, and that's a good way to, when we talked about earlier about having the top level go through it first, and make sure, is this really right for the organization, and do we want to move forward with this? If it's not, you need to have some honest conversations of why isn't this right? Why can't this work, and why can't we get on board and move forward with it? And maybe it'll take a little bit of time to work through that action plan and that strategy plan before you do move forward. Middle managers that are disconnected. Again, we talked about upper level management going through the training first, and then if you forget about the middle manager level, that will be a key breakdown, because again, those supervisors are directly report to that middle management group, and they need to be engaged almost fully on board, just like the executive leadership or the top management of the facility. They're the ones that are going to have the conversations on a daily basis with the supervisors. They're going to touch and have the safety contacts with the employees probably more often than your top level management. So they really need to be connected and engaged in the process. And no strategy for ongoing successes, basically a measurement plan. We talked about earlier about a survey, or there's several other things. How are we going to measure success? How are we going to measure the supervisor's success in going through this? How is the middle management group going to measure success, and if our supervisors changing the way they're doing things, changing the way they're recognizing employees, changing the way they have safety contacts, getting away from the employees are doing things wrong and I'm catching them doing things wrong compared to catching employees doing things right. So to wrap up, and I harped on this point numerous times, but I think it's really important to emphasize it. You've really got to have executive support that shows visible commitment to it, because even if they go through the one and they say visible commitment, for them to kick off each meeting, for supervisors to know that the executive level or the top management of facility is really on board with it and it's really something they want, they're going to get on board with it. So it's kind of what your boss wants is what you do, and that holds very true to this. So if ultimately the supervisors know this is what upper management wants and they show that visible commitment to it, you're going to get much more engagement earlier on with the supervisor group than without. And also developing a strategy to maintain the momentum. Don't get started until you truly have a well-developed strategy for how we're going to roll this out initially, how we're going to make sure everyone gets through it, how we're going to make sure everyone has a good action plan, and then afterwards, how are we going to check success? How are we going to know that we're making a difference and doing things right, not just looking at injury numbers, but looking at the proactive activities that we talked about in the safety river. What are supervisors doing? What are employees doing that truly are engaging the workforce? So with that, Abby?
Okay, thank you so much, Jason. Before we get to our questions, and we do have several of them, I just want to let everyone know about this exclusive offer that we have this month in line with the webinar, which is 25% off the S.T.A.R.T program through our online shopping cart at safety.cat.com. And the coupon code is there. You would enter that once you get to the shopping cart stage, webinar 25, and this offer does expire July 2nd. If you encounter any difficulties with the order, feel free to contact us and we'll help you through that. So we do, like I said, Jason, have a series of questions that came through, and I think that between the two of us, we can probably answer all of them. You can certainly speak to your experience facilitating S.T.A.R.T within Caterpillar facilities, and then there may be some questions in which I can contribute some information and experience based on customers outside the Caterpillar enterprise that Caterpillar Safety Services is working with. So let's get going with those. The first is, does the S.T.A.R.T program define or provide any cultural safety training for shop floor employees? Is there a separate program, or could this material be modified to include safety committee or shop floor employees? And Jason, I'll let you take that first.
Okay. And the S.T.A.R.T material itself, you obviously could take some of the material. You want to educate your workforce on what your supervisors have been trained on and what to expect from them. There's also other materials, SKUs, Safety Culture Excellence Workshops, and other things that you can use to educate your workforce on this journey, what it's all about, why we're going through it, what can you expect to see, what the S.T.A.R.T training looks like, why supervisors are going through that, and what you should expect from them. We want employees on the shop floor to know what we're going through. It shouldn't be behind closed doors. And we want them to hold us accountable. You know, if a supervisor isn't living up to the expectations of what we set forward, we need to know that, or the organization needs to know that, so we can talk to that supervisor and provide them additional assistance and find out why.
That's an excellent response, Jason. And I would just also add, when it does come to additional programs, we do have a couple of programs that are focused around building communication skills related to safety, of course, but really once you build those skills, it can be applied to anything important to the business. And those programs are called Speak Up and Listen Up. There's also a program called Recognize It. And those are targeted a little bit more toward the frontline employee, although plenty of supervisors and management too benefit from the tools and the methodologies inside those programs. But because S.T.A.R.T does include such a heavy component on communication and how we speak to one another and how we relate to one another when it comes to safety, I think that the Speak Up, Listen Up, and Recognize It programs would be good complements for those shop floor employees.
Agree. Very good, Abby.
Okay, one more question here, or the next question, I should say. How do you use S.T.A.R.T when you already have pretty good safety culture, communication between employees, and recognition practices to refine rather than redefine what we do?
That's a good question. I have not run into that yet within Caterpillar. Most of the facilities that I've worked with have needed the material. I don't know, Abby, do you have some experiences outside?
Well, I will say from Caterpillar Safety Services perspective, working with customers, we typically work at that level of good, looking to go to great and to excellent. And so it's uncommon that we would even be engaged with customers that felt that they didn't have a need for something like this. I think we all agree that most organizations are on a journey that doesn't end if they are truly seeking safety culture excellence. And so the role play activities within S.T.A.R.T for building the communication piece and how to handle maybe the problem areas in the organization, I think really aren't necessarily about redefining what your journey is, but just to sharpen those skills as you're pursuing it. Okay, let's see. The next question is, what is the ideal class size?
Good question. That we didn't touch on that. Yeah, typically you want about 10 to 12 participants per class. You don't want significantly fewer than that, because you really would lose that facilitation and that engagement and that discussion if you get too few of people. And also, if you get too many people, it's too easy to lose that person that doesn't want to speak up or just wants to sit in the corner or sit in the back of the room and not get engaged. So a good 10 to 12 people, I've found, has always been very effective. That's a good number that facilitator can truly engage with every person, Obviously you do the tent card, so if you've got a person sitting there that doesn't want to speak up or engage in the training, you can call them out by name and ask for specific examples of what do you think about that? Because that in any course there's always a few that tackle and bring up topics and discuss on almost everything, and then you've got those that just like to sit there and keep looking at their watch, and okay, is 8 hours almost up? So if you keep the class size at the 10 to 12, you can really engage all folks.
Okay. The next question is, can you share from your experience any good examples of executive support and visible commitment post-training?
Post-training? Let me think of the best example we've got of post-training. Probably the one facility that I've worked with, they have regular meetings with all hourly employees, and it's almost on a regular basis that they recognize supervisors in those meetings for things that they've done related to safety performance. So it's not always about recognizing the hourly employee, but also recognizing the supervisor. So if you recognize a supervisor, hopefully it turns around and they wind up recognizing their employees more, and it just kind of feeds on itself. So at this specific facility, when they've done that, they seem to be able to sustain the momentum that they had going.
Okay. The next question is, how do you effectively influence and gain active involvement with leaders who are institutionalized? And by that, this participant means these people are promoted from within and not because of leadership skills or ability, but rather based on their ability to understand their job role.
Sure. Yeah. So someone that, knows how to build whatever you're building inside and out, and they're the expert in it, so let's make them the supervisor of the department. I assume that's what the person is asking?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah, obviously you could you roll out the S.T.A.R.T training, but if they don't have those leadership skills, they don't have the ability to engage employees or discuss or have conversations with employees, it really falls back to some fundamental supervisor. So, and I've ran into this before also, and you really have to work with the HR department. There's a lot of courses there through most HR organizations that really helps to get that supervisor to how to have effective communications, how to engage in folks. And so it wouldn't go just necessarily for safety. If they're not doing it for safety, they're probably not doing it for quality production, safety or employee issues or anything. They're trying to maintain their individual contributor role, but trying to run a department. And a good way is to provide a mentor. So if you know a supervisor in another department that is just phenomenal, really good at engaging folks, really good at running supervisor safety meetings, across the board just is nailing it, hook those two up and have the new supervisor kind of shadow and see and lessons learned and best practices and that kind of thing from the veteran supervisor. Or maybe it's not a veteran, maybe it's just someone that's very good at those personal skills.
Okay, next question is, what would be a recommended methodology for the follow-up meeting that takes place 1 month after facilitating the S.T.A.R.T course? I guess which points possibly are most important to review?
I had pretty much like the ones that I hit today. So you're talking the accountability, the safety contacts, the 7-to-1 recognition, those highlights of the program would be good to sit down and that's the way I've done it in the past. Is it's the first course is 8 to 12 hours, so this 1 month review is maybe only an hour, maybe a couple hours. You spend just a little bit of time hitting a highlight. So you talk about accountability and what does that look like, and then you stop there and you let supervisors talk about where they're not getting it, or yeah, they heard that during the training, but they're just having trouble figuring out how to effectively do that on the floor after they left the training. And another supervisor may chime in and say, well, I've done it this way, or I've done it that way, or I found success through this or that. And that's where I've seen tremendous success. And from that, you can sometimes get informal mentor programs developed where, hey, maybe we can talk a little outside of this, or oh, it sounds like really good the way you're doing your startup meetings. Do you mind if I come tomorrow and watch how you do it? I've heard those comments kind of behind the scenes off to the side as you do those 1-month review or 6-month review courses.
Okay, Jason, you did touch briefly during your presentation on the various delivery methods of the program and how customers both internally to Caterpillar and externally can use the program. But if you wouldn't mind just reviewing those, because we've had a few questions related to whether or not someone can take this as an off-the-shelf program and use it on their own, or use a Caterpillar facilitator, or even use the train-the-trainer process. And I guess I set you up there with all three of the methods.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, those are the three ways you can do it. The S.T.A.R.T training can be purchased through Cat Safety Services as a direct purchase. You get the material, and you go with it, and it's self-directed. You can obviously hire Cat Safety Services consultants to come out and help you with the plan of how you're going to roll it out, do all the training courses. Or the third option is to hire Cat Safety Services to come on site and help you select proper facilitators and actually go through a train-the-trainer course. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Abby, the train-the-trainer is a 3-day course where you go through the material. You go through the material, and then that train-the-trainer actually has a couple days of practice time to where they can practice the material, get feedback from the Cat Safety Services consultants, get recommendations. Here's what you did really good, kind of, again, the positive recognition. Here's what you did really good. Here's some opportunities where I could see how you could engage the audience or engage participants a little bit better. So, yeah, all three of those options are available for purchase through Cat Safety Services. Okay,
thank you. And next question is related to some success stories that we've seen in customers that have implemented the S.T.A.R.T program, potentially showing a reduction in lagging indicator metrics or incident rates. And I can speak to one specifically, and that is Wagner Equipment, which is a Cat dealer. Started using this program in 2008, and then within 1 year, their total incident rate was down by 60%. Now, Wagner has continued to use S.T.A.R.T and build on it through the years, and has continued to see its severity rates go down as well as its total recordable rates. And I don't know, Jason, if you have any other success stories specifically to point to.
No, I don't yet. We're still kind of early in the journey, and some of the facilities that have implemented S.T.A.R.T, I'm seeing successes when you look at just S.T.A.R.T, but they've got some other struggles when they actually translate that into actual injury reduction. So one had such a bad culture that employees were hiding injuries. So I believe overall they're making significant improvements, but now that employees aren't hiding injuries, their incident rate is actually maintained flat, which in my view is a success story because we don't no longer have employees hiding injuries. So we've probably reduced the number of injuries, but we're truly seeing the true picture of what's all happening in the facility.
And I think it's important to note that most organizations use S.T.A.R.T as a piece of an overall safety management system, and many of the folks on the line here are familiar with Caterpillar's zero incident performance process and maybe engaged in it themselves. And S.T.A.R.T is often a complementary program, or at least a piece of that process. And so when it comes time to look at your numbers, it can be difficult to say this improvement is all tied to S.T.A.R.T versus, this is really a result of this all-encompassing effort that we're all, in this journey that we're all on. That S.T.A.R.T is a piece of that, but there are other positive things going on here that are delivering positive results. Okay, another question here, Jason. What are some things you measure to see if your strategy is successful?
That's a really good question. I haven't come across that before. I guess the first one is working with your supervisor group, and ask them how they feel that's going. So your strategy is not only the training, but how well you're going to measure it. Do these supervisors think the measurements are accurate and fair and something that they can get engaged with? But really, I think the strategy is a part of the entire process. So if what I talked about was surveying the employees, if your employees aren't seeing a change or a positive change in the way the culture is going, or your supervisor group, it's probably a result of something wrong in the strategy or the way it's rolled out. Because again, the strategy is how we're going to measure, how we're going to ongoing have discussions with supervisors. So if they're not seeing a meaningful change, that's probably an indication that the strategy needs to take a look at and see where we're missing it and why aren't supervisors engaging. And then, if that survey is done and you find that, then ask the supervisor group, why aren't our employees seeing a change? Maybe put them on the spot a little bit and ask for their involvement. So we talked about getting employees involved in the process. Same thing, get supervisors involved in the process.
Okay, terrific. Well, that concludes our Q&A session. If you have any additional questions, please do submit them to us at that email address you see there, safetyservices@cat.com, or you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly. My name is Abigail Fansler. My email is there. And so thank you, Jason, for all that you've shared with us today. And I want to encourage everyone to take advantage of this 25% off deal on our S.T.A.R.T program. And certainly, as I said, if you have any questions about the program itself or the content that we shared today, do get in touch with us. We'd be happy to talk with you more about it. And with that, I want to wish everybody a good day. We got you out here 8 minutes early, so go enjoy a cup of coffee. Thanks again, Jason.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.